Hello everyone, kindly hit the subscribe button on your screen and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, cream-colored cardstock with gold foil lettering that caught the light when I turned it in my hands. Ironic how something so beautiful could conceal such ugly intentions. I traced my finger over the embossed names, Vanessa Williams and James Parker cordially invite you. 3 years. That's how long it had been since Vanessa, once my best friend from college, had spoken to me. 3 years of silence after I'd watched her transform from the woman who'd held my hair back during finals week breakdowns to someone I barely recognized. Someone who, according to the text message that had accidentally found its way to my phone last night, had invited me to her wedding for a laugh and to show everyone how far she'd come. The look on her face will be priceless when she realizes the misdirected message read. Nobody from the old crowd even talks to her anymore. They'll die when they see what she's become. I set the invitation down on my kitchen counter, next to the stack of medical journals with my name, Dr. Zora Jenkins, listed among the contributors. Next to the photo of me receiving the Breakthrough Research Award last month, and beside the keys to my new lakefront home. They wanted to humiliate me. They expected me to arrive desperate for approval, unaware that I was being paraded as a cautionary tale. A before image to Vanessa's glossy after. What they didn't know, what Vanessa couldn't possibly know, was that I now possess something that would unravel the perfect tapestry of lies she'd woven. A secret I discovered while reviewing patient files at the hospital where I now served as chief of cardiology. A secret about James, her flawless, wealthy fiancé, that would bring their entire charade crumbling down. I picked up my phone and typed 2 words in response to the RSVP, I'll come. Sometimes revenge isn't about striking back. Sometimes it's simply about revealing the truth that others have worked so hard to bury. And as I slid the golden RSVP card into its matching envelope, I felt something I hadn't experienced in the 3 years since Vanessa's betrayal, a sense of power. The wedding was in 6 weeks. 6 weeks to decide if I would use what I knew, or if I would rise above it all. 6 weeks to prepare myself to face the woman who had once been closer than a sister, who now saw me as nothing more than entertainment for her wedding guests. I sealed the envelope with a steady hand. Whatever choice I made, one thing was certain, this wouldn't end the way Vanessa had planned. The dress I chose was burgundy, deep, rich, and unapologetic. As I slipped it over my head, I couldn't help but remember the last time Vanessa and I had gone shopping together. We were celebrating my acceptance to medical school, and she'd squealed with delight when I emerged from the dressing room in a similar shade. "You look powerful in that color," she'd said, her eyes bright with genuine pride. That was before everything changed. Before James Parker entered our lives like a storm, sweeping Vanessa into his world of country clubs and corporate galas. Before my friendship became an inconvenient reminder of her humble beginnings. I stood before the mirror, smoothing the silk against my hips. At 34, I looked better than I had in college, more confident, more defined. The years had been kind, despite the heartbreak that had threatened to consume me when Vanessa and our entire friend group cut me out after the incident. The incident. Even now, 3 years later, my hands trembled slightly as I clasped my grandmother's pearls around my neck, remembering that night. It was at the engagement party for James and Vanessa. I'd arrived late, having come straight from a 30-hour shift at the hospital. Exhausted and distracted, I'd accidentally walked in on James in Vanessa's father's study, hurriedly hanging up a phone call. The panic in his eyes when he saw me was instant, visceral. "Zora," he'd said, his charm slipping into place like a mask. "You startled me." "Sorry," I mumbled, turning to leave. "Wait." His hand had caught my arm, fingers digging in just slightly too tight. "Vanessa tells me you're doing incredible things at the hospital. Research that could change lives." I nodded, uncomfortable with his sudden interest. "I have connections," he continued, his voice dropping. "People who fund the kind of work you do. But they're particular about who they associate with." That's when he'd said it, the suggestion that I should minimize my background, my family's struggles, my identity when meeting these potential donors. that perhaps I should let Vanessa take the lead in introducing me, reframing my story into something more palatable for the old money crowd. I'd pulled my arm away, told him I was proud of every part of who I was and where I'd come from. The conversation had ended there, but by the next morning, Vanessa was calling me, fury in her voice, accusing me of trying to sabotage her relationship, of being jealous, of making James uncomfortable with my aggressive attitude. Within a week, our entire friend circle had chosen sides. I was suddenly persona non grata, uninvited from gatherings, removed from group chats. 12 years of friendship, erased. What I didn't know then, what I only discovered 3 weeks ago while reviewing patient charts, was that James Parker wasn't just asking me to hide who I was. He was hiding something far worse himself. My phone chimed, pulling me back to the present. It was a text from Daniel, my colleague at the hospital and the only person who knew what I was planning to do. "Are you sure about this?" his message read. "There are other ways to handle it." I sighed, typing back, "He's building his medical empire on fraud, Daniel. And she's letting him use her family's connections to do it. What happens when people start dying?" Because that was the truth of it, James Parker's pharmaceutical company was falsifying clinical trial data. As chief of cardiology, I'd started noticing patterns in patients taking their new breakthrough heart medication. Adverse effects that weren't being reported, dangerous interactions that were being minimized. When I dug deeper, I found evidence that James had buried negative results, pushed medications through approval with manipulated data. People would die. People probably already had. And Vanessa? She worked in his company's PR department. I couldn't prove she knew everything, but she was certainly helping craft the perfect public image that kept the questions at bay. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd accused me of being jealous when in reality, I'd simply refused to compromise my integrity. Now, I held in my hands proof that could not only destroy her wedding but potentially send her fiancé to prison. I slipped my feet into heels, tucked the USB drive with copies of all the evidence into my clutch, and took one final look at myself. Tomorrow was the wedding. Tonight was the rehearsal dinner where I would see Vanessa face to face for the first time in 3 years. "You don't have to do this," I whispered to my reflection. "You could just send the evidence to the FDA anonymously. Walk away." But then I remembered the patient from last week, a 42-year-old mother of 3 who'd suffered a massive stroke after taking James's medication. I remembered holding her husband's hand as he wept, as he asked me why the drug that was supposed to save her had taken her away instead. Sometimes justice requires a witness. Someone willing to stand in the room and speak the truth, no matter how uncomfortable. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. The rehearsal dinner was being held at the Westmorn, the most exclusive hotel in the city. I'd be facing not just Vanessa and James, but everyone who had chosen to believe the worst about me 3 years ago. My phone buzzed again, another text from Daniel, "Whatever you decide to do, I've got your back." I smiled, feeling a surge of courage. At least this time, I wouldn't be standing alone. The Westmorn Hotel gleamed like a jewel against the evening sky, its marble facade illuminated by strategically placed spotlights. I handed my keys to the valet, ignoring the slight widening of his eyes as he took in my appearance. Perhaps he was surprised to see a black woman arriving alone to the Parker Williams rehearsal dinner. Or perhaps, more likely, he simply recognized confidence when he saw it. I smoothed my dress and walked through the grand entrance, my heels clicking against polished floors that reflected the crystal chandeliers overhead. The event was being held in the grand ballroom, and with each step toward it, memories threatened to drown me. Vanessa and I had once promised to be in each other's weddings. During late nights in our dorm room, we'd planned every detail, the dresses, the venues, the vows. No matter what, she'd said, curled up in her pajamas, "We'll stand beside each other on the most important day of our lives." Now here I was, invited not as a bridesmaid but as a spectacle. I paused at the ballroom entrance, taking a steadying breath before stepping through. Immediately, I felt it, the ripple of awareness as heads turned, conversation stuttered, and eyes widened. I kept my chin high, my expression neutral. The orchestra continued playing, but the melody seemed to fade beneath the sudden wave of whispers. And then I saw her. Vanessa stood across the room in a champagne-colored dress, her hand resting lightly on James's arm as they greeted guests. She was laughing at something an older woman had said, her head tilted back to reveal the elegant line of her throat. For a moment, looking at her, I felt 18 again, meeting my freshman roommate for the first time, both of us nervous and hopeful about the future we'd build. Then her eyes met mine, and the illusion shattered. I watched the progression of emotions flash across her face, shock, confusion, and then something that looked almost like fear before her society smile reasserted itself. She whispered something to James, whose head snapped up to look in my direction. His expression darkened momentarily before smoothing into practiced charm. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server and took a deliberate sip, giving them time to process my arrival. I'd chosen to come alone, without the +1 the invitation had grudgingly included. Let them wonder about my life. Let them fill in the blanks with their own insecurities. Zora Jenkins, a voice said beside me, and I turned to find Claire Thompson, once one of my closest friends, now a stranger in an expensive dress. You actually came. Hello, Claire, I replied, keeping my voice warm despite the ice in hers. You look well. You? She paused, clearly thrown by my composure. You do too. Chief of Cardiology agrees with me, I said lightly, watching her eyes widen slightly. Though I miss our Sunday brunches sometimes. Claire had the grace to look uncomfortable at the reference to the tradition she'd abandoned along with our friendship. I should get back to my husband, she murmured, retreating before the conversation could go further. I watched her go, noting how she immediately huddled with 2 other former friends, their heads bent together as they cast furtive glances my way. Let them talk. I wasn't here for them. I circulated slowly through the room, exchanging pleasantries with strangers who had no idea of the history bubbling beneath the surface. Several times I caught James watching me, his expression unreadable. The USB drive in my clutch felt suddenly heavier, a physical manifestation of the power I held. Finally, inevitably, Vanessa approached. You came, she said, her voice pitched low enough that only I could hear. I wasn't sure you would. Did you think I'd miss it? I asked, meeting her gaze steadily. Up close, I could see the fine lines around her eyes that her makeup couldn't quite conceal, the tightness in her smile. Success hadn't brought her peace. You look. She seemed to search for the right word, different. 3 years is a long time. Is it, she asked, a hint of the old Vanessa peeking through, the one who could cut to the heart of a matter with just a few words. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. For a moment, we stood in silence, the weight of our shared history pressing down between us. I thought of the laugh we used to share, so specific and synchronized that people could identify us from across campus just by the sound. I thought of her holding my hand at my mother's funeral, of the secrets we'd whispered in the dark of our shared apartment. Why did you invite me, Vanessa? I finally asked, though I already knew the answer. She hesitated, and in that pause, I saw the truth. She was ashamed of the invitation's true purpose. James thought, she began. James thought, I repeated, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. When did you start letting James think for you? Her expression hardened. You don't know him. You never tried to. I know more than you think, I said quietly. Something in my tone must have alarmed her, because she took a small step back. What is that supposed to mean? Before I could answer, James appeared at her side, his hand possessively curling around her waist. Zora, he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. What a surprise to see you here. Vanessa mentioned you might not make it. I wouldn't miss it, I replied, raising my glass slightly. Congratulations on all your success. Your new heart medication has been making quite an impact. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You work in cardiology now, don't you? Chief of Cardiology, I corrected gently. It gives me a unique perspective on pharmaceutical breakthroughs. His eyes narrowed slightly, and I could almost see the calculations running behind them. How much did I know? What evidence did I have? Would I really risk making a scene? Perhaps we could talk shop sometime, he said smoothly. After the wedding, of course. Of course, I agreed. Though I'm particularly interested in discussing the Cardiolex trials. The ones from last spring? I have some questions about the data. The color drained from his face, and his grip on Vanessa's waist tightened until she winced slightly. Darling, she said, touching his arm. We should greet the Hendersons. They just arrived. James nodded stiffly, but as they turned to leave, he leaned close to me. Whatever you think you know, he whispered, his breath hot against my ear, remember who has the power here. I watched them walk away, noting the rigid set of his shoulders, the way Vanessa glanced back at me with something like confusion in her eyes. Power. That's what this had always been about for James. The power to shape narratives, to silence opposition, to determine who belonged and who didn't. But as I stood alone in that glittering ballroom, surrounded by people who had once been my friends, I realized something important: power isn't always about wealth or connections. Sometimes it's about the courage to stand up for the truth, no matter the cost. The rehearsal dinner continued around me, but my mind was already on tomorrow. The wedding day. The moment when I would decide whether to use what I knew to destroy the future Vanessa had chosen, or to find another way to ensure justice was served. As I sipped my champagne, I caught sight of my reflection in one of the ballroom's ornate mirrors. The woman who looked back at me wasn't broken or humiliated. She was poised, determined, and carrying a secret that could change everything. By this time tomorrow, nothing would be the same. Before I continue, make sure you hit the subscribe button on your screen. Morning light filtered through my hotel room curtains, casting golden patterns across the bed where I'd barely slept. I'd chosen to stay at the Westmorn after the rehearsal dinner, partly for convenience, partly because I couldn't bear the thought of driving home alone with my thoughts after seeing Vanessa's face. The wedding was scheduled for 2 o'clock. 8 hours until I would sit in that church and watch my former best friend marry a man whose ambition was killing innocent people. 8 hours to decide what kind of person I wanted to be. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, Daniel again. Any decision yet? His text read. I stared at the message, remembering the conversation we'd had when I first discovered the evidence about Cardiolex. Daniel had wanted to go straight to the FDA, but I'd hesitated, knowing what it would mean for Vanessa. Despite everything, some part of me still cared what happened to her. Still thinking, I replied, setting the phone down. I showered and dressed slowly, deliberately, as if each action required conscious effort. The burgundy dress from last night hung in the closet, but for the wedding, I'd chosen something different, a deep blue gown that reminded me of the color of the lake behind my new home, where I often sat in the early mornings, finding peace. Peace. That's what I'd fought for these past 3 years. Building a life where Vanessa's rejection couldn't touch me. Was I willing to disrupt that peace for justice? Or was it really about revenge? The USB drive sat on the desk where I'd placed it last night. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. Such a small thing to contain so much destruction. My phone rang, an unknown number. I answered cautiously. Dr. Jenkins. A woman's voice, trembling slightly. Yes? This is Rebecca Parker. James's sister. I froze, pulse quickening. How did you get my number? From the guest list. She paused, and I heard her take a deep breath. I need to talk to you. About my brother. About Cardiolex. My hand tightened around the phone. I'm listening. Not over the phone, she said quickly. Can you meet me? Now? In the hotel garden. It's important. 20 minutes later, I was sitting on a stone bench in the Westmont's meticulously maintained garden, watching Rebecca Parker pace the gravel path in front of me. She was younger than James by several years, with the same aristocratic features softened by a genuine anxiety that her brother never displayed. I saw your face when you mentioned the trials last night, she said, finally sitting beside me. You know something. I could say the same to you, I replied carefully. Her eyes, the same steel grey as her brother's, met mine. I work in his company. Research decision. I've seen things. She twisted her hands in her lap. Documents that don't match. Test results that disappear. Patients who die. I finished for her when she couldn't. She nodded, a single tear tracking down her cheek. He says it's for the greater good. That sometimes progress requires sacrifice. She laughed bitterly. He actually believes he's helping people. He's killing them, I said flatly. I know. Rebecca wiped her tear away angrily. I've tried talking to him. He says I don't understand business. That I'm too soft. And Vanessa? I asked, the question that had been burning inside me. Does she know? Rebecca hesitated. She suspects, I think. She's asked questions. But James is good at deflecting, at making people see what he wants them to see. She gave me a knowing look. You found that out 3 years ago. So she knew about that too. I wondered how James had spun the story to his family. I have evidence, I said quietly. Enough to stop Cardiolex. To stop him. Her eyes widened. You're going to expose him. Today. At the wedding. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. I haven't decided yet. Why not? She demanded. People are dying. What's holding you back? I turned away, looking at a nearby rosebush heavy with crimson blooms. Vanessa, I admitted. Despite everything. I don't want to hurt her. Rebecca was silent for a long moment. You still care about her. 12 years of friendship doesn't just disappear, I said softly. Even after what she did. She misses you, Rebecca said, surprising me. She'd never admit it, but sometimes she talks about you. When she's had too much wine. The adventures you had in college. How you were the only one who believed she could succeed when her own family didn't. My throat tightened. I remembered those days, Vanessa's father dismissing her ambitions, her mother suggesting she focus on finding a husband instead of a career. How I'd helped her prepare for interviews, edit her resume, practice presentations in our tiny apartment kitchen. She chose him, I said finally. She chose his version of me over the truth. People make mistakes, Rebecca said, standing up. The question is whether they get the chance to correct them. She reached into her purse and pulled out a thumb drive similar to mine. This is more evidence. From inside the company. Use it however you decide. She pressed it into my palm, her fingers cold against my skin. The ceremony starts in 4 hours, she said. Whatever you're going to do, you need to be sure it's for the right reasons. I watched her walk away, her slim figure disappearing around a hedge of boxwoods. 2 USB drives now. Double the evidence. Double the power to destroy. And still no clarity on what I should do. The church was a masterpiece of Gothic architecture, all soaring arches and stained glass that cast jewel-toned light across the assembled guests. I sat near the back, ignored by most but occasionally drawing curious glances from those who recognized me from the rehearsal dinner. The organist began playing, and everyone stood as the procession started. I watched as bridesmaids in pale gold dresses glided down the aisle, Claire among them, carefully avoiding my gaze as she passed. And then came Vanessa. She was breathtaking in an ivory gown that seemed to capture and reflect every bit of colored light from the windows. Her father beside her looked proud, oblivious to the fact that he was giving his daughter to a man whose corporate empire was built on falsified data and hidden deaths. I felt the weight of both USB drives in my clutch. I had compiled the evidence into a single presentation, clear, damning, undeniable. One email from my phone would send it to the FDA, the medical board, and several journalists who had been investigating pharmaceutical fraud. My finger hovered over the send button as Vanessa reached the altar. The ceremony began, the priest's voice echoing through the vast church. I barely heard the words, my mind racing, my heart pounding against my ribs. This was the moment. If I was going to act, it had to be now. If anyone can show just cause why this couple cannot lawfully be joined together in matrimony, the priest intoned, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The traditional words hung in the air. A perfect moment, dramatically appropriate, cinematically satisfying. I could stand up now, declare what I knew, watch James's world crumble in front of everyone he'd sought to impress. The church was silent. Expectant. I looked at Vanessa's face, radiant, hopeful, her eyes fixed on James with such trust that it made my chest ache. And suddenly, with perfect clarity, I knew what I had to do. What I should have done from the beginning. I didn't stand. I didn't speak. Instead, as the priest continued with the ceremony, I quietly pressed send on the email I had prepared, not to create a public spectacle, but to ensure justice would be served. The difference was that I had removed Vanessa's name from the evidence. Separated her from James's crimes as much as possible. She might still face questions, investigations, but I had given her the chance I wished she had given me 3 years ago, the benefit of the doubt. The priest asked James if he took Vanessa to be his lawfully wedded wife. As he said I do, his phone buzzed in his pocket, no doubt the first of many notifications he would receive as my evidence landed in the inboxes of those with the power to act on it. It was only when Vanessa repeated those same words that I saw it, her gaze drifting over James's shoulder, finding me in the back of the church. Our eyes locked for just a moment, and something passed between us. Recognition. A question. And then the church doors burst open. James Parker, a voice called out, authoritative and unyielding. I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of fraud, falsification of medical data, and criminal negligence resulting in death. Federal agents streamed down the aisle as gasps and cries erupted from the guests. I sat perfectly still, watching as understanding dawned on James's face. His eyes found mine, hatred blazing in their depths. But it wasn't my doing, or at least, not directly. As one of the agents approached James, I recognized him as the husband of the woman who had died after taking Cardiolex. The woman I had tried to save in my hospital just last week. Somehow, he had found his own path to the truth. In the chaos that followed, I saw Vanessa standing alone at the altar, her bouquet fallen to the floor, her expression one of absolute shock. When her eyes found mine again, I saw not hatred or anger, but something far more complicated. I stood up quietly, preparing to slip away. Whatever happened next, my part in this was done. I had chosen justice without spectacle, truth without vengeance. But as I reached the church door, I heard her voice call out behind me. Zora! Wait! I froze at the sound of Vanessa's voice, my hand still reaching for the heavy church door. Behind me, chaos continued to unfold, James being led away in handcuffs, guests standing in shocked clusters, phones recording every moment of the spectacular collapse of what should have been the society wedding of the year. But somehow, in the midst of it all, Vanessa had noticed me leaving. Had called my name with the same urgency she'd used in college when I was walking away from an argument, when she couldn't bear for things to end on bad terms between us. Slowly, I turned. She stood halfway down the aisle, her perfect ivory gown gathering dust from the stone floor, her veil askew, mascara beginning to track down her cheeks. Gone was the polished society bride. In her place was the Vanessa I remembered, raw, authentic, unguarded. Did you know this would happen? She asked, her voice carrying despite the commotion around us. I nodded, unable to lie to her. Not now. But you didn't stand up. You didn't say anything during the ceremony. No, I agreed quietly. I didn't. She took a step toward me, then another, her train dragging behind her like the weight of all our shared history. Why? She demanded, stopping a few feet away. After what I did to you, after what we all did, why not take your moment? I looked at her, really looked at her, seeing beyond the designer gown and perfect makeup to the girl who had once shared her last packet of ramen with me during finals week, who had held me through the night when I got the call about my mother's diagnosis. Because that's not who I am, I said simply. And deep down, you know that. Her face crumpled, and suddenly she was crying in earnest, shoulders shaking beneath layers of delicate lace. Without thinking, I closed the distance between us, wrapping my arms around her as she sobbed against my shoulder. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her words muffled against my dress. "I believed him. I chose him. I let him convince me that you—" "I know," I said, my own tears threatening to fall. "I know." We stood like that as the church gradually emptied around us, federal agents escorting James away, guests filing out in stunned silence. No one approached us, perhaps sensing the sanctity of the moment, or simply too wrapped up in the scandal to notice the bride embracing the woman who was supposed to be her cautionary tale. Finally, Vanessa pulled back, wiping ineffectually at her ruined makeup. "Did you know?" I asked the question that had been burning inside me. "About Cardiolex? About what he was doing?" She shook her head, her expression haunted. I suspected something wasn't right. The numbers never added up. But every time I asked questions, he had answers that seemed to make sense. She laughed bitterly. "He was so convincing. He made me doubt myself, just like he made me doubt you." I nodded, recognizing the pattern. James Parker had built his empire on making others question their own perceptions while accepting his reality. "What happens now?" she asked, gesturing vaguely to the empty church, the scattered flower petals, the abandoned altar. "Now," I said gently, "you rebuild. Just like I had to." She looked at me with something like wonder. "How did you do it? After we all turned on you, how did you become?" She gestured to me, to the confident woman I now was. "One day at a time," I said. I focused on what I could control, my work, my research, my own integrity. The rest followed. "And you found happiness?" she asked, the question small and vulnerable. I thought about my life, my lakefront home where I drank coffee at sunrise, my work that saved lives, the small circle of true friends I'd cultivated. I thought about the peace I'd fought for and finally achieved. "Yes," I said honestly. But there was always something missing. Her eyes met mine, understanding passing between us. 12 years of friendship isn't easily replaced, no matter how hard you try. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said. "Probably not," I agreed, and she laughed despite herself, a watery, genuine sound that echoed in the empty church. "But I'm giving it anyway." We walked out of the church together, into the bright afternoon sunlight. Reporters had already gathered on the steps, cameras flashing as they caught sight of the abandoned bride. "Dr. Jenkins," one called out, recognizing me. "Did you provide the evidence that led to Parker's arrest?" I felt Vanessa stiffen beside me, preparing for another betrayal. Instead, I took her hand and squeezed it reassuringly. "No comment," I said firmly, guiding her past the media scrum to a side entrance where my car was parked. "You're protecting me," she said as I opened the passenger door for her. "Why?" "Because that's what friends do," I replied simply. "And we were friends long before James Parker came along." She gathered her massive skirts and slid into the car, looking utterly incongruous in her wedding gown against the leather seats of my sensible sedan. "Where are we going?" she asked as I started the engine. I thought for a moment. "Remember that diner we used to go to after finals? The one with the chocolate milkshakes that could cure anything." For the first time that day, Vanessa smiled genuinely. "Joe's? It's still open." "Some things endure," I said, pulling away from the curb. "Even when we think they're lost forever." We drove in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of the day settling around us. There would be hard conversations ahead. Vanessa would have to face the fallout from James's crimes, rebuild her reputation, possibly even testify against him. But for now, we had chocolate milkshakes waiting and a friendship to carefully reconstruct. "I invited you to humiliate you," she said suddenly, staring out the window. "That text message, it was real. James suggested it as a way to show everyone how far I'd come, compared to you." She turned to look at me, shame written across her face. "I agreed to it. I want you to know that I'm not pretending I didn't." "I know," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "How can you forgive that?" I considered her question carefully before answering. Because holding on to anger was destroying me. Because I've seen what happens when resentment becomes your compass. I glanced at her. And because everyone deserves the chance to become better than their worst decision. She was quiet for a long moment. The woman who died from cardiac, she finally said. What was her name? The question surprised me. Elena Rodriguez. She was 42. 3 children. She was an elementary school teacher. Vanessa nodded, absorbing this. I want to meet her family. To apologize. It won't bring her back, but it matters, I finished for her. Acknowledging the human cost matters. We pulled into the parking lot of Joe's Diner, still the same faded sign, the same jukebox visible through the windows. As if time had stood still in this one small corner of the world. I can't go in there like this, Vanessa laughed, gesturing to her wedding gown. Sure you can, I said, turning off the engine. You'll just start a new tradition. Milkshakes for healing broken hearts and shattered illusions. She smiled, but it faded quickly. Do you think I'll ever be okay again? After all this? I reached across the console and took her hand, feeling the absence of the wedding ring that had never been placed on her finger. I know you will, I said with certainty. Because you're stronger than you think. You always have been. We sat there for a moment longer, 2 women at a crossroads, one in a ruined wedding dress, one in the blue of calm waters. Both changed by the paths we'd traveled. Both facing an uncertain future that somehow, against all odds, might include each other again. Ready? I asked. Vanessa nodded, gathering her courage along with the folds of her dress. Ready. As we walked toward the diner, an absurd, beautiful pair drawing startled glances, I realized something important. The secret I'd brought to destroy Vanessa's wedding hadn't just exposed James's crimes. It had broken the chains of deception that had held us both captive for 3 years. Sometimes destruction is necessary for rebuilding. Sometimes the truth, however painful, is the only path to healing. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get a second chance at the friendships that shape your life. We pushed open the door to Joe's Diner, the bell jingling overhead just as it had a decade ago when we were young and unbroken and the future stretched endlessly before us. 2 chocolate milkshakes, I told the wide-eyed server. We've got a lot to talk about. Life rarely gives us perfect endings, just new beginnings disguised as devastating conclusions. Zora and Vanessa's journey reminds us that true courage isn't found in revenge, but in the harder path of truth, forgiveness, and the willingness to rebuild what seemed permanently broken. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe for more tales of resilience, redemption, and the complicated beauty of human relationships. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between justice and vengeance? Have you found the strength to forgive what once seemed unforgivable? Your stories matter too. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most powerful secrets we hold aren't the ones that destroy others, but the ones that finally set us free.